What is a flood? On the face of it, this seems a really simple question, and it's one that shouldn't be too hard for us to answer. And if you've been unfortunate enough to have been flooded, then you know exactly what a flood is. It is water where it shouldn't be, principally in your house. It is 100% crystal clear to you what it is. Although essentially this is exactly what flooding is, water where it shouldn't be, there are also many reasons and causes for why it got there and why it stays there. And behind each of those reasons is a unique set of circumstances and processes that mean we need to use a different set of methods for each one to predict, plan and respond to it. And in some cases the flood itself is not actually water. Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Skinner, a floodologist, and join me in this video as I explore exactly what a flood is. If you looked up a dictionary definition of what a flood is, you'll probably get something like an overflow of water on land that's usually dry. For many circumstances, this is enough of a definition for us to work with. For those of us who work in planning and preparing for flooding, we need a definition which is a bit more nuanced, something that takes into account the different types of flooding, the different causes of it, and those different challenges that each one of those causes bring. So these are the main types of flooding. Fluvial flooding, or flooding from rivers, is probably what most people think of when they hear flooding mentioned. Generally this happens during a period of heavy rain or when snow is melting and all that extra water flows into a river. If there's enough water, the level of the river will rise enough to go over the top of its banks and spill out onto the land around it. This is a natural thing to happen, and that land surrounding the river that gets flooded is referred to as its floodplain. Essentially, the floodplain is as much a part of the river as the main channel itself and is used to take those extra flows when the river levels are at their highest. As the flood recedes and water levels drop, the flows slow down and they begin to drop sediment out onto the floodplain, making it really fertile farmland. The land in floodplains is usually flat and that makes them attractive for building. So floodplains are usually home to many farms, towns and cities. But this puts them and the people who live and work in them at risk of flooding. And this risk has led to extensive engineering work, things like earth banks and flood walls, which seek to separate the floodplain from the river. However, even the largest engineering works have their limits. And one day there will be a big enough flood where the water levels are high enough to go over our flood walls into the river's floodplain and whatever it is we have built in it. Flash flooding is another form of fluvial flooding, but it happens very, very quickly. Most river flooding happens because of heavy rainfall over several days or even weeks. But flash flooding happens because of intense, very local convective thunderstorms that happen in just a matter of hours in the summer when the air is warm and moist and full of energy. When these small, intense thunderstorms happen over small, steep-sided river catchments, that sudden influx of water is funneled down narrow and steep channels. This can create a wall of water that is very energetic and powerful enough to pick up rocks and pick up trees, and it bulldozes its way down the river catchment, destroying anything in its path. Although they can be devastating, thankfully they're very rare. Coastal flooding, or flooding from the sea, can be extremely dangerous, capable of inundating large areas of low-lying land next to the sea or other tidal areas. The most common causes of this are storm surges. These are bulges of water resulting from low atmospheric pressure and wind swells during storms. They are capable of raising the local level of the sea by several meters, and when they coincide with a high tide, the resulting higher water level can be enough to overcome flood defences and flood large areas of land. Such is the danger of these storm surges that around the world, huge engineering projects have been constructed to stop those surges travelling inland. These include the tidal barrier in London and the delta works along the coast of the Netherlands. Tsunamis are also a risk for coastal areas around the world. These waves are caused by sudden and often violent displacements of water, usually resulting from earthquakes or landslides or even extraterrestrial collisions. The areas at risk of flooding from rivers or the sea are quite easy to identify these days, and many countries will have produced maps which show these areas. For example, in England, the Environment Agency produces a map that shows the combined area of flood risk from both rivers and the sea. Pluvial flooding, or flooding from surface water, can happen anywhere. The word pluvial means from rain, and pluvial flooding happens when the rain is so intense that the water falling on the ground is of such a volume that it's too great for local drainage to move it away. That drainage can either be natural, like water flowing through the ground and into the soil, or it can be human-made, like networks of ditches around the side of fields, or drainage and sewer networks in towns and cities. With nowhere to go, that excess water just ponds on the surface and causes a flood. Some causes and origins of flooding are a little bit more unusual and maybe things you might not think of. We all know that the soil beneath the ground can get wet, but did you know that water actually flows much deeper below the surface and through rock itself? Some rock is porous, meaning it has small gaps and holes through which water can flow and be stored. Other rocks are cracked and are fractured, which provides route for water to flow through. Water beneath the ground can continue to flow further down until it hits a rock that is neither cracked nor porous. It will then begin to pull and fill up all the available gaps it has. We call the top of this underground store of water the water table. After prolonged periods of rain, these stores begin to fill up with more and more water, and when they get too full, that water table spills out onto the surface of the ground and causes flooding. We call this groundwater flooding. Reservoirs and dams store water, usually to provide us water to drink and to make sure we have enough water when there's very little rain and during droughts. However, the level of water within reservoirs and behind dams must be carefully monitored and managed. If it gets too high, it might overtop the dam, and this risks a catastrophic failure of the dam itself. To reduce this risk and to lower the level of water in the reservoir down to a safe level, there can be an emergency release of water. However, this can temporarily overwhelm the rivers downstream of the dam and cause flooding. However, the alternative, the sudden release of all that water in the reservoir because of the failure of the dam, would be utterly devastating and likely result in a loss of life. Flooding can also happen when water pipes leak. This can either be the infrastructure which keeps our cities running, or the pipes in your own home. It can even happen if you forget that you've left the bath running. But sometimes floods can happen when water isn't involved. One of the most famous and unusual examples is the Great Molasses Flood that happened in Boston, USA in 1919. It was reported that a 12-meter high wave of molasses, a sticky, sugary syrup, flooded the streets of Boston when a tank holding 12,000 tons of it exploded. Sadly, this flood of molasses claimed 21 lives. Other examples include the London beer flood of 1814, or this flood of 200 litres of red wine that happened in Portugal in 2023. So then, what is a flood? Yes, most often it is an overflow of water into land that is usually dry. But I hope that I've showed you through this video that to really appreciate what a flood is, we need to understand all the different types of flooding, the different causes of flooding, and the different challenges that they bring us. If you've enjoyed this video, please do support me in growing the channel. You can do this by giving this video a like and also by subscribing to the channel itself. But for now, stay dry out there.